Hola, hola. Ahí está, disculpame. Bueno, vamos a dar comienzo al panel de hoy.
We are going to start today's panel, morning. We are going to begin our morning session. This panel will be addressing data economy, rules to increase digital confidence and business opportunities in Latin America. I'm going to introduce our colleague Elena Scaramucci, and then I will call all the members of the panel so that they can take their chair. Please, if you can come up and take your seats. As I mentioned, Daniel Kataki, Vice President, Policy and Regulation of ESM, Elena Goberna, Representative of ALAI, Carlos Baigorri from Anatel, Executive Superintendent of Anatel, and Germán Darío, Executive Director of ERAC, Colombia. Elena, please. Elena will make an introductory presentation so that we can start the debate, and then we will proceed to the debate. Morning. We are here to make a brief presentation on the context of digital economy.
¿Cómo funciona?
Aprovecho para recordarles que estamos
I take the opportunity to recall that you can place your questions online. You know how this works. This is plenary session A, so place your questions. Please don't forget to state your name and organization. Well, I can start. The first idea is to know what is the ongoing debate on digital economy. I've been looking for information on the scope of data economy, and I've found several figures. For example, the World Economic Forum states that the global data economy is pegged at US $3 trillion, and there are other statistics that mention more or less this figure. But what seems important is to define the scope of data economy, because in the practice there is no one single definition. The ecosystem, the context. But we can say that in Europe, for example, there has been information about data economy to try to encourage this market and increase the GDP. And priority sectors for data economy have been identified. But going a little bit further in my analysis, I've seen that in practice there is no consensus on what has been defined as the scope of data economy and digital economy. There was a study by the International Monetary Fund last February, and the objective of this paper was to define a methodology to measure data economy. They themselves have seen that there is no one single definition, and to show what could be included, they identified, for example, for the United States, what would be the sectors included in the digital economy. You can see that it is measured in percent of GDP. We have a little bit of everything in these statistics, and there are other activities that are not included in statistics for several reasons. They were quantified with a percentage that would be a percent of the GDP in the United States, and the figure is quite high. There is another study that was published last week by an Italian regulator. It's an interesting study on data economy with interesting concepts of what the data economy represents. One of the concepts in this study is that this is a two-sided market. The users and the companies. And it shows how, or it shows the data flow. The yellow arrows show the monetary flows in this market. They have also analyzed the dimension of the cloud, how the cloud is increasing in terms of zettabytes, and it has shown that in practice GCP infrastructure is very important, and it has changed a lot because there are new actors investing in infrastructure. This is the case of Google, for example, the Google Cloud Platform. This shows how the GCP infrastructure has been expanded by OTT operators. Here you can see statistics about the evolution of online advertising. Online advertising is interesting because on the one hand, it has increased a lot. There is a new paradigm. It shows how most of the income that used to come from traditional publicity today is in online publicity. Now, the interesting thing here is to see increase of publicity in mobile platforms. The blue part, light blue part, shows that publicity incomes are higher in mobile platforms than in fixed platforms. This panel will be addressing different perspectives. We can present the political or policy issues for data economy from the perspective of the users. We have also seen in previous days issues like privacy, affordability, We need to see what are the pros and cons, and we need to balance the opportunities and challenges, both from the point of view of the users as well as of the governments, because on the one hand you have good opportunities, but also important or difficult problems and serious challenges. There is a possibility of having more innovation, more efficiency, more jobs, economic growth, but on the other hand, there are concerns regarding competition, protection of the citizens, and availability of new services. Actually, we can say that this is a two-sided problem. Sorry. On the one hand, we discuss a lot, the analysts, the regulators, etc. We talk about responsibility, about appropriate regulations, and how to address immediate problems. But there is another perspective which I think, or in my view, is more important, and it is what is really happening, what generates well-being for the society. How do you define society well-being or ethical issues? I think the statistics have shown that only gives you an idea of the different trends in terms of data economy, can lead us to the impression that speed is what is most important. All these curves I have shown is or shows statistics of very few years. These statistics, or we have started collecting statistics from or since 2015. This is my introduction. I hope we will have a good debate in the panel. Thank you, Elena. Elena, can you please go back and leave that slide on so that we can have a list of what will be the most important aspects for our discussion. Now we will begin our debate. I want to remind you that we are looking into the future. We are going to talk about how our region can make use of the opportunities and address the challenges of the digital economy in the near future. In this near future, we can see that the cloud services, 5G services, will allow the development of the Internet of Things generated by these services that are in the slide, with big data and other technologies like artificial intelligence. This means the automation of many of the tasks that we carry out manually today. Economists are debating what will be the net profit or the net result of the loss of jobs, old jobs, and the creation of new ones if there is any net profit. Now, one thing is sure, our economies and societies desperately need a stronger or sounder regulatory framework. Some of you may not agree with what I'm saying, but we need this to help develop this transformation. I've listed the main challenges So these are the topics that are going to be commented by the members of the panel, starting with privacy, which is essential to generate confidence in the clients. Security is also essential in the agendas of the companies and of the nations. The responsibility of the product, maybe we need clearer rules by the consumers and companies. We also see that an increasing number of decisions are made based on algorithms, and maybe these algorithms should be more transparent. Governments and citizens alike should demand more transparency on the legitimacy of these criteria to make these decisions. The debate on the property of the data, competition laws or rules, to analyze these new forms derived of data compilation, storing data in the cloud, legal problems both for companies and citizens. The portability of data has become a new right. Free flow of data, transboundary free flow of data is essential to take advantage of scale economies, and the rules that were mentioned yesterday are based on the physical presence, and maybe they are not the most adequate in a virtual context. And then B2C and B2B that is increasingly done in electronic platforms. Maybe we should adopt certain rules on the ranking of these platforms and take into consideration the possibility of exclusion or preferential conditions that we could offer in the future. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Daniel Tataki, GCM-A. I'm going to ask him in English.
Could you please give us your point of view after Elena's presentation and make a little introduction around what exactly is this data we are talking about? How does the value chain look to you? What does it look like right now? I know you've done a study recently about this, and what are the main challenges for policymakers? There's many questions in one, but could you please kick off the debate?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, I just have to. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And I need to apologize because I don't speak Spanish. I always knew I have a default, but this is it. So I'm really sorry for the translator, but they are really doing a good job. So thank you, and I try to speak slowly if somebody is, using translation. So exactly. I have like 20 years of experience in telecom regulation, unfortunately, so I feel very old. And I think 10 years ago, when I was going for conferences, the theme was, mobile is king. So now the new theme is, of course, data is king. So as Ezekiel mentioned, in GSMA, we are working on a study right now, trying to understand, what is data and what are the importance of data, and more importantly for this discussion, what could be challenges for regulation in data. So we are about to finish this study, and hopefully we will present it, or we will come out with it in a few weeks, so hopefully you will see it. So the first thing I would like to say, when people talk about data, and people used to remember there was an Economist front page, and it was said, data is the new oil. So the first thing I have to say, unfortunately, that data is nothing like oil. Because data is something which is intangible. You know, you can touch the oil, you cannot touch the data. Data is something you can replicate. You cannot replicate oil because you used it once. Data is something you can reuse. You cannot reuse the oil. And data is something becomes a good when you experience it, when you use it. Oil is there, it's in the ground. So it's oil because it's important, but this has nothing to do with oil. The second one, what we looked at might be interesting for this discussion, is how the value chain look like in data economy. So you have data generation, which speaks for itself. You know, I personally generate my own data. Now we are generating data sitting here. The next step is the data collection, when someone is collecting the data we are generating. The third one is data analytics, when somebody is analyzing all that collected data. And the first one is the exchange, or the selling of the data. And of course, it's not a big surprise, but data analytics is the most important part in this value chain. The third thing I would like to mention is what is interesting, or what are the key features of this value chain. So Elena mentioned about the two-sided markets, but two-sided markets, I used to be an economist, it was a long time ago, but the two-sided market is not specific to data economy, right? So newspapers are two-sided markets. You collect the advertisement from one side, and you collect
credit cards.
So this is not, this is important to understand data economy, but this is not specialty. What is special, I think, is the type of the vertical integration of data economy. So I told you the value chain, but you would see, if you see, operators in this value chain, and some of them sit here as well, that they try to integrate everything all together. So you wouldn't have like just an analytical company. It is, working like this. The second feature, which is I think very important also for regulators, what we call the platformization, right? That these becomes, I don't want to go into detail because it takes a lot of time, but what is a platform? But we all know, so they become like a platform, right? And the third one, I think what is important, but this is also more like technical, is it has an effect of a so-called multiple service markets or conglomerate effect, which is, once you are vertically integrated and you became a platform, then you tend to go into other markets which is close to you. Okay? So why all this is interesting for policymakers? What are the challenges? We see two types of challenges. One is a type of a competition challenge, which has, I think, 2 points. One is a challenge in itself. Is there a competition issue within a market? So is there dominance there? And the other one, what we call, or economists call, the so-called conglomerate effect, that even if you have dominance in your market, can you use that dominance to go to your adjacent market or not? The very important thing is, this is, I think, the most important thing to stress. These are, conceptual things to discuss. It's, we are in Latin America, we are in Cuba, but as I say, globally, this is something nobody has ever, what we discuss is, I think, is just discussed, as you said, in Europe at the same time. So, this is just discussed at the global level. So nobody has ever found a solution. That's number one. The number two is we shouldn't forget, because we are in a governmental forum, that this is, we don't have to jump to regulate something just because it's there. So data economy, of course, is something which brought a lot of innovation, a lot of good things for citizens, as Elena mentioned. So one, if somebody's look at it, has to take a step back. And the last point from me on this, as I said, two things for regulation. One is competition, and the other one, which is more, I think, for the discussion for this panel, is all about privacy and trust. So sorry for the long words, but this is it.
Thank you, Daniel. And before, I wanted to ask you a question, but before I will talk to, I want to hear Carlos Baigorri, who has, sorry, voy a volver a español. Entonces,
Back into Spanish. Now I will give the floor to Carlos Baigorri. Now that you have mentioned this about regulation and non-regulation, we were talking with Carlos Baigorri from Anatel about the destructive power of digital transformation. And I want you to share with the public your theory and what is the main challenge of this digital transformation. If there should be intervention, if there shouldn't be intervention. Carlos, you have the floor. Well, bearing in mind that in Europe, well, Metataki and I, we work in Europe, and there has been intervention in Europe. Thank you, Sakiel. Morning. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to be here, and I apologize for my Spanish, which is not so good, despite I'm in Argentina, I've been living in Brazil for 30 years. I believe that the most serious challenge for digital transformation and all this technological revolution we are living in the world is basically how the governments are going to deal with this. If we look back in history, some centuries back, England was an island in the middle of nowhere, and the Ottoman Empire was one of the biggest and oldest empire in the world. When we had the first industrial revolution, the Ottoman Empire developed barriers, and England created the conditions for this innovation to be used for the benefit of the economy. Today, we know what happened to the Ottoman Empire, and England is one of the richest and most developed country in the world. I think in this case, in Latin America, we have to see how our governments will deal with this. Digital transformation needs to be supported by the governments. In Argentina and in Brazil, we see local initiatives to create barriers to this revolution or transformation. So we see that governments are a little bit resistant to technological changes because they lose power. Yesterday I was talking with Ezequiel. New technologies like blockchain will make the work of public notaries to be something of the past. Crypto coins may put an end to the monetary power of central banks. So, in my vision or view, governments that resist this innovation will bring backwardness to their economies and their countries. So that is a great challenge. What will be the reaction of these governments? In Brazil, we see that there are many regulations because municipalities don't want to lose control on the licensing. So they put in place regulations because they don't want to lose the power. And I think that is a great challenge for digital transformation. I have been working as a regulator for 10 years in Brazil, and when we began to discuss regulatory frameworks and laws and rules, there was something we didn't understand very well. We are talking about privacy in internet and things like that. I believe that the best way to have an adequate regulation is to have enough concrete cases and effective demands so that we can understand well what is the problem we want to solve. We have seen this in Brazil. Recently, there has been a debate on internet. But we mix the problems, we mix fundamental rights with consumer rights, and we try to solve a problem without knowing the problem. Fortunately, it's like we need to know well what we are talking about. We have conditions to guarantee privacy in communication networks. For 20 years now, since Anatel was established, there has been no demand, no concrete case of demand due to privacies in telephone conversations. I only know of one case with Facebook, but I don't know anybody that has been affected out of the 50 million persons that have been using these technologies have made any demand. I'm saying this because I don't have Facebook. I don't use Facebook. I think that the service I'm being provided, if I don't like the service I'm being provided, I just go somewhere else. So I think we are trying to bring up a solution for a problem we don't know very well. And I think we are running to establish global regulations and standards. And I'm very much concerned with this, because how do we do this in Anatel? We need concrete proposals, and we analyze case by case. And if we cannot solve the many cases we have to solve, then we need a general rule. So I think the recommendation should be to identify a problem and find what is the general solution we want to give to the problem. I think we don't have a clear idea of what the problem is. I'm still an economist. For me, it is very important to know what is the failure of the market. What do we have to analyze? And sometimes it's not because we have a market failure. The problem here is that when governments try to solve a market failure, they create a government failure. So we need to know if the cost is bigger than the prejudice that is generating the failure. So we need to know what the failure is and what are the causes to see if then it would make sense to have a regulation. I think in general this is what I have to say. We're trying to find solutions to problems we don't know very well, and in recent years what I see is that most of the time solutions are partial ones and generate more problems than benefits for society. So that is my view and my concern with this race trying to solve problems. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for sharing your concerns. The state is having less power. I will now give the floor to the La Goberna of Alay so that you can react to what has just been said. I want to know if you agree or not, and there is a specific question regarding transboundary data flow, and how do you see how things are going on, what is needed, what tools have been implemented in Latin America to remove these technical obstacles to commerce, and what model would be the best in your view?
Fíjate si funciona el... Ahí tienes un micrófono. Gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Cuando hablamos de flujo transfronterizo de datos, lo primero que me parece a mí que tenemos que tener...
Border flow, I believe that we must consider the impact that the data economy has in ICTs in general. Most of the regional economy in our countries in Latin America is supported by the productivity and competitiveness of our products in general. Even though there is not a regulatory standard in this regard, there have been important progress made bilaterally and multilaterally in establishing principles that allow for a cross-border flow of data. There are examples of how this topic has been addressed to provide the best protections and also not to hinder the competitiveness of the regional and internal players in Latin America. There are different models based on principles such as cross-border privacy rules, which are the ones that are fostered by APEC, and it establishes principles for data exporting in a context of data security. How can we remove obstacles to international trade, provide competitiveness to our small and medium-sized companies, promote innovation, and not just remain in standards and new regulations where it might not be fully understood and may lead to other standards of security that not really match what happens when we get to the implementation, when we actually find the problems. A regulation of GPR magnitude, for example, may look complete at first, but the challenge and the best position we have in Latin America is how we are going to implement this and how these complex issues can actually have an impact, and look carefully and be cautious enough when establishing standards that are supposed to be flexible in a way. So we must try to pay attention to the standards that we want to establish in order to better set regulations to provide competitiveness to our small companies, to create jobs, have a more innovative modes of use, and also provide the highest standards of security, to have a balanced regulation that on one hand fosters competitiveness and on the other hand provides the best standards and security. Thank you very much, Adela. I think that the questions system is not working properly, so we're going to do the questions, we're going to post the questions in the traditional way. So jot the questions down, and we will not forget to give you the chance of having a couple of questions at the end. Thank you, Adela. Now, I would like to hear Germán Darío, who will tell us a little bit about the big data. We know Colombia became the first Latin American country to have a public policy on the use of big data. Telecom companies and the platforms and the banks are the ones who collect and generate more data. Big data is a tool to make commercial decisions and also political decisions. How do What is your view about the opportunities and challenges in the short and long term? You might be looking in the future for the next 5 years. And can you tell us a little bit about it? Well, thank you, Ezequiel. So, with due respect, I have to respond or answer what Carlos has said. There are two statements that are not correct in my view, of course. First, I don't think that the state will lose power. Maybe the state will become smaller, but can be more efficient and more powerful. And I cannot attest that the community is growing more than it should. Second, when Carlos says that if you don't like Facebook, simply get away from it. It's like saying if you don't want to be robbed, don't go to the streets. So that is the extreme. If you don't like it, then don't go outside so that your cell phone is not stolen. There must be a data protection policy. There must be successful cases. I say not to regulate for suspicion. That is extreme, but not just to leave things limiting any activities that might be there. So that's too simple for my taste, with all due respect. Colombia handles big data. In Colombia, the department that handles it is not here in this panel. So the CNC does not have an involvement there. So what we did in Colombia was to design a public policy to export data for the public sector in combination with the private sector. A series of risks were identified, and I believe it is the most important thing that we should address. Basically, that the state may take bad decisions because they don't have the data updated. It can lead to bad decisions in terms of public policies. Second, the data could be used wrongfully. For example, the insurance company, through the traceability of the social networks, will determine that a given citizen has or has not the right to a given insurance, or establishes insurance according to the activities in social media. Citizens check the terms and conditions of the digital economy. They actually do not read the small letter, and they don't know what they are approving to for the case of the use of this public data. For the current legislation does not provide information for some data in particular. The public entities may use the public data, but they cannot give them in an intricate way. So you have to know how much a data is public, how much is personal, how much is confidential, or even public security related data. Obviously, there is an involvement in the privacy, existence of monopolies in the handling of data, discriminatory practices, and limitations to the freedom of choice. Consequently, based on these risks, the planning department developed an analysis of what was going on and established CAMPEX 2018. That CAMPEX had the goal of providing the public data to the masses. Also, legal protection, improving the capacity of human capital. In public entities, less than 1% in the entities have someone only devoted to analysis of data, only 1%. So, public policies for big data. Big data generates social and economic value. Second, the rights of persons are the limit of the exploitation of this data. So data exploitation, the border of it, is how it must be set as far as my rights may get. Mechanisms of cooperation between the private and public sector must be established as much as possible. Public data must be considered as public infrastructure resource. So the data of the Colombian state must be ready, available for the public, for them to use that data. So, for the future, what is the goal? This is a big challenge. So we started all the territorial planning data for the municipalities. If they had done that with persons, they would have taken 3.8 years to collect that information. They did that in 14 hours. 14 hours only. So the state might be smaller, but it's more powerful. It doesn't have to be less powerful. So the challenge is, first, what is public data? How far can it get? Second, interoperability. There must be interoperability. And what happens in Colombia is that the information that exists in the phone companies and Social Security is different from that in tax authority or what is in my child's school. So there must be interconnection. Second, transparency. For the use of public data, there must be transparency. To know my data, to know what they do with me, and if I want them to do something with it or not. So my decision might be, I don't want them to use it at all. So the challenge is to have transparency, a legal framework, stable legal framework, and basically let the state use it in the right discretion. I leave it here. Now, we can have a second round before. So I wonder, Herman, does this policy has any emphasis on the use of the data by the state? You will answer that to me later. And you can answer also the use of the companies, the citizens, and the export of this data in Colombia. But we'll leave this for later. Now, before I would like to give the floor to Blanca Coto from CIGET, the superintendent and the regulator of El Salvador. The question is around the El Salvador's digital agenda. We know that you have made progress with this agenda, that it is being implemented. What technologies are you using for this transformation, which I know you want to undertake? Can you tell us what it is about? Thank you, Ezequiel. Good morning. I would like to thank, first of all, the invitation to this panel, the organizers, and to greet you all, and to thank the hospitality of the people and government of Cuba, who is hosting this event and has taken care of us so well during these days we have been here. For El Salvador and for the government of El Salvador, talking about data economy is talking about an inclusive digital economy, a safe and transparent economy. What does this mean? It means that it is not just something that comes about spontaneously and unplanned, but just the opposite. The government defines at the beginning of its mandate a 5-year plan between 2014 to 2019 that places the human being as the center of the activities of the state. That is what the text of Article 1 of the Constitution states. This, for our vision of government, implies an active participation of citizens, helping to build new development models. So speaking about a transformation from the technological standpoint only makes sense with the participation of the population and the transformation not for a time, but for not for an elite, but for a great variety of men and women. In this case, our people, El Salvador. This is why we talk about data economy and the digital transformation. How do we do this? First, our organization, our government organization, is established in cabinet. And we have the Ministry of Economic Management, where the telecom regulator is part of, social inclusion, security management, governance, and environmental sustainability and vulnerability. What is the magic behind this? Each of these departments have a direct connection with the SDGs. and we have determined which has an impact in each of the different departments. In the case of the economic management, it has to do with the SDG 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, and 17. Everything having to do with reaching the SDGs that we have signed and ratified in most of our countries and region. We're talking about work, education, consumers' rights, and so on. So, how are we doing this? As you have said, the first thing we established was a public policy, a digital agenda with 5 components. The first one, digital connectivity. The goal is to connect those that are not connected. Second, e-government. That is increasing the activities that can be achieved and done from the government using ICTs and alternative means that are not just a physical presence, but everything having to do with the virtual procedures. It shouldn't be just a one-sided approach, but we needed to build ICT capacity among the population, and there are several presidential programs. 4 components, how we move towards digital economy, not just thinking for the internet, for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but how can we implement digital activities for medium and small companies, how we generate GDP using technology, and we are moving forward slowly. And 5th, governance of the information society. We are talking about what has been mentioned, security and transparency. But what we needed for that, as a point of departure, a legal framework, a different legal framework. We came from a law from the privatization processes of 1996 that was obsolete for the year 2014. So in 1996, we didn't have these phones. We basically have some bricks we use as cell phones. That's the way that we call them. So the legal framework, and the first thing was a legal framework that would make visible the massive impact that we want to reach for universal access, accessibility, and the appropriation and learning and actually gaining of the technologies that allow for freedom of expression, freedom of thinking, in order to close the digital divide and achieve social inclusion, the development of the competitive telecom market, and ensure the rational use of the spectrum. And this is a new component derived from new faculties for regulatory agency, allowing to have an efficient use of the spectrum based on the international standards that we have today at the ITU. Compliance with international standards and treaties. So we join in the new legal framework, new principles for the telecoms, advertisement, inclusion, equality, privacy of information, universalization, non-discrimination, maximum benefit to the user, financial management of the resources, optimization of the scarce resources, and freedom of expression. How many votes? It was voted with 82 votes of 84 members of Congress. This is one of the few laws that has reached that level of consensus and the concept of in the context of the Congress. So it leads us to concrete actions, specific actions that are undertaken by the agenda. One of the good news that I want to share with you is the fact that doing an efficient use of the spectrum also implies that the operators can have the relevant spectrum to develop all the different ideological platforms. So I want to invite you all to participate in the bidding processes that are taking place this year in the band 2.5, in the band AWS, in the band 1900, and these are the new biddings, but we already had recently, last year, the renewal of all the licenses that currently exist with current operators. We are open to new operators, always. All this must tell us that there is still new technologies to be incorporated. The first is the right of the user, was a right to numeric portability, data roaming, doing away with regional roaming and other topics that are controversial but have been adopted in the telecommunications agency. So now we have updated data day by day. This morning we had 637,000 contributions from the 26th of August. And now we are transforming the television from analog to digital with the participation of all the industry. We're moving in the hotline because the level 1 for the protection of children and women. And we recently started a protection hotline for the protection of women, not just in the telephone, but also data. A data line that allows to interact with the person that might be vulnerable due to domestic violence or harassment, which may have a hotline to assist them, and also one for the children. Many children are victims of bullying, are victims of abuse or violence, and they don't have anyone to talk to. A lot of population that are vulnerable, what they have is a cell phone, and not necessarily a person that can listen to them. So we have habilitated 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 6. So I stop here because I have many things to do. I will cut here and then I stop here because the rest we can talk on in the productive area for entrepreneurs and all the money that has been invested from the government in awards to innovation. Thank you.
Now that you took the discussion towards protection, user protection, I would like to make one more round. I know you are eager because there's a debate within the debate, and Carlos and Daniel wants to answer. We want to answer Herman. I will let him speak. I don't want, I just want to ask about the user protection, but we will be, in the interest of time, the data protection ruling in Europe, which was enforced recently, which entered into force.
I know you will reply to what was said before, but I want you to tell us what is the point of view of the GSMA regarding the positive impact of the GDPR and perhaps also the outstanding issues, what is missing from the GDPR. And then we continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But I found really interesting the debate between Carlos and Herman. So I really want to spend, one minute on this. Because from the 20 years, I used to be a regulator for 8 years. I was head of regulator Hungary and the European regulators. So what Carlos was saying was kind of music to my ears. Because you don't often hear regulators to say, okay, before I regulate, I really have to look for what is the market problem, right? The second you said, okay, whenever there's the market problem, I have to look at the cost and benefit to go there. And the third one, I have to be conscious about that I'm of my institutional capture, so that I don't want to regulate because to provide my existence. I think this is very important that you said it, and I think it should be in every regulator's role. But on the other hand, I have to say in this concrete case I'm much closer to Herman. Herman, yes, what he was saying, because when you were saying about the market problem, so I was explaining two kind of maybe problems. One was about competition, and we don't say not everybody should jump there, but we say that operators or regulators has to observe, and observe what is and there must be potentially a problem of, whether there's a competition, but also there's a balance between competition and innovation. But the other one, what Hernan was saying basically, we do think at least, I'm working globally, but for Europe for sure, European citizens and governments think that there's a problem in privacy. So there's a problem. There's a problem for governments saying that, I don't want companies to decide what is good or bad because they are not democratically elected. So I don't want a company to decide that this topic or this content is good because I'm elected, I want to do that. I don't say it's wrong or bad, but this is what some governments in the world think. On the second one, on citizens, most of European citizens are concerned. And what Hernan was saying is maybe because of transparency. So you're right, I'm not on Facebook, neither. But who is on Facebook? Most of the people may be not as enlightened as we are, but then, they have to know what happens with their data. And they can be enabled to be decided that this is, I agree with this or not, and then I don't want to use that service. I don't want to, I can talk about GDPR, but maybe this is more, it's up to you, but I would rather pass the ball.
Bueno, gracias.
Thank you. Let's dot the i's here. I believe there is a problem here. It's exactly what you said about data are not like oil. There's a rivalry among them. I send the data to a company.
Eso es un problema que en economía se dice que no es un problema de bienes públicos, están asociados a una criminalidad.
I'm saying, yes, there's a problem, but the problem is not well characterized. I think there is an hysteria in this sense, and everyone is trying to make a regulation without having a real case in it. That's the problem. You be using wider tools. When you are using bigger tools, you are generating inefficiency. I'm not saying that there's no problem. I'm saying that we need to understand well what the problem is before finding a solution. I believe that I'm saying this from a theoretical point of view. There's an evidence of that there is a problem, but I don't believe I'm the one who will know about all the problems. I'm certain that we need to have concrete cases to understand what are our problems. And a problem I see in Brazil that is not solved yet. Sometimes rules and laws have passed, and there are no institutions to guarantee that those laws will be enforced. That's a problem. In Brazil, the government has the companies to guarantee the telephone line. The central bank will guarantee the safety in banking system. Even in gyms, we have, in Brazil, sometimes they use the biometrics for entering the gyms. And they cannot sell that information to other companies. So who will guarantee, who will regulate the gyms? Are we going to have an institution who will make the regulations for the gym and telephone companies? Do you think that will work? Then you have a beautiful law, and then you have, if you don't have those institutions that will enforce those laws, I'm concerned because I don't think that law will be used somehow efficient, in an efficient way. So my point is not that we don't have a problem and we don't have anything. I believe there's a problem, but we need to know what the problem is and we need to find a solution. If that solution is good, we will apply it. It's not that we go to a solution without knowing what the real problem is. And I believe the government, if they apply this, it will be better. A clear example in Brazil. on the internet framework. See? It's common in Brazil when they are monitoring a criminal, they know what, for example, WhatsApp. You can do that in Brazil because the information, when the legal system try to ask WhatsApp about the emails about the criminals, they will say, I'm abide to the California laws, and I can't give you the information. Then there was a lot of discussion to guarantee the geolocation information. That's a problem when demanding information from this WhatsApp and other companies. Imagine the next few days, all communications will be used by operators, will be managed by operators, and the government will not have power to ask those companies the information, so the government will lose power. I agree on you that we should be more efficient, but efficient means is to do more with less resources. So government will have with less things to manage, but will be more efficient. For example, the power of giving license to the taxes, that's a big discussion in country, in Sao Paulo mainly. In Brazil, we have a lot of regulations of national quotes, for example, independent quotes. In Netflix, does not exist, or national PTV. So Brazil, what Brazil is trying to do is trying to regulate the national quotes of Netflix. So the guy will say, have a network in Brazil. They will start to destroy the dismantle scale economies having a global economy. That concerns me a lot. Governments will be resistant to changes because they were losing their powers to no audio. Yeah, someone cut your mic off.
Usa el otro.
Bueno, voy a decir acá.
Cortito.
The other point to discuss, I don't believe that to have access to a social network, neutral social network, fair, it's a right, a fundamental right, just like the right to public safety. It's not the same to have to be on the street, be safe, and to enter in a specific network with people you like. Because we do that, and we believe that it's a fundamental right for the citizens to have access to a social network. The government will have to create that social network to guarantee that right. So now social networks and platforms are solutions, market solutions for people. I have a little bit liberal vision, because for many times the governments were far away from all this I mentioned. And I say this is because I work in regulations for a while. I've been working in regulation for a while, and this is a reflex of a regulator to create regulations for problems that they don't need a regulation so far. That's why I believe there is a privacy problem, yes, but I don't know if the solution presented is the solution for the problem that exists. I believe we need more study, more effective cases, more claims. We in Mamatel created regulations in Leased Lines, which is a very competent program in Brazil, and we created a lot of regulation without having information whatsoever. And years later, what we had the result was that it doesn't work. And so it's hard for a regulator and a government official to have results, good results. And what we do is to regulate and regulate and regulate, and in order to enact a new regulations, we do it. We're willing to do that, but to prove a right, it's sometimes very hard. We believe that in order to regulate, to launch a new regulations, we need to discuss and study. And when we find a real problem, we will find the solution. It's like we are going to have to launch a vaccine without knowing the disease. First, you study the case, and then maybe you will analyze if they need a vaccine or they need maybe a pill. Thank you very much. It's a very good example of vaccine point. I think we need to end. I want to give a chance to the audience for a question. I think we have 5 minutes yet, but we started 30 minutes later. We need to take this into account. Adela. Before ending, what kind of regulation or how the regulation affects small companies, local companies, small companies, and what will be the obstacles for these standardizations to be spread out in the market? I would like maybe to go back what has been said about how do we think about regulation, on regulation. We need to investigate, research, and understand the work. But maybe regulating a specific case, and this might have a consequence. Maybe that's not, and not having the result we try to have. Sometimes we act strongly on a specific case, and that made it impossible to understand holistically how this system works. I was talking about technologies that they are at our disposal. We're talking about new methods that reinforce our security. We need to react for a specific against a specific case with a regulation. We will not have the effect we want. If we're going to regulate on a specific case, sometimes we lose the background information about one thing that might be important. The most important thing is that regulation should be that way, should have a group of information, should not be a reaction against a specific behavior. Thank you, Adela. Would it be possible, 1 more minute, the 2 final members of the panel? That would be fast. Final words. 1 minute top. I will shut you down. Just one thing. The fundamental right is not the access to internet. We are right on that. It turns out that this is the biggest network so far. And you know, to lose your right for being online. Another thing I want to say, states are armed vertically. I said that yesterday. The regulation does not work in the virtual world. What they have to do is to rethink the structure and the structure of the state to take part. It's not about more regulation. It's not about some regulation. It's a cross-cutting, not vertical. 3 main ideas. First, data economy, inclusive economy data, it will need a regulation that make possible, in our case, to achieve the goals and principle of telecommunication law. We need capacity building in the populations in ICTs as a public policy to really achieve a digital economy, to provide with a qualified labor force with all this digital vision. We as a government, we have launched the presidential program, 1 kid, 1 computer. We are connecting public schools in a country. We are giving equipment to schools, public schools in a country, in all areas, and specifically in rural areas. And the radioelectric beating will link them to special conditions in terms of equipment and focusing on education. And the last idea, it's good to we have the chance to discuss on this, those who are here, but we need to work together to take these discussions to the majority of the people. That's the only way our countries will develop, and ICTs will impact in the life quality of our population. That's our aspiration. God bless us all. Thank you, Blanca. The most part of the people are the audience. I would thank you for being here. I regret that we took too much time. I just want to ask one single question. Someone who will raise your hand if you have something to say, or else we will be done. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank God that make us be here today.
Excelente panel, felicidades.
Excellent panel. Congratulations, Ezequiel. Excellent presentation by each of the speakers. Now we will continue with the program. Now we have the flash session. Now I'll present Serafino Abate from SMA, who will speak about competence in the digital era, the infrastructure in Central America. You have the floor.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in Varadero, in Cuba. I have the chance to present the last study by GSMA and concerning the market structure. We have been developing a study for the last few years to understand the impact and the system of different and structure of markets and the benefits for the consumers. The study we have developed, we have analyzed two aspects of the study. In a group of Central American countries, Costa Rica, Panama, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and El Salvador. The approach of the study was about two subjects. The impact of the market structure in those countries, about investment and infrastructure and the network quality. And the second one, the role of the public policies, including the public policies on mobile sectors, of course, the quality of the network and investments. How do we analyze that in Central America the mobile networks are quite developed in coverage, but they do not get to the last generation network. So what we saw was they are lag behind. That happened the transfer from 3G generation, and it's shown in the 4G networks right now. We believe this is very important because in many, we believe that mobile broadband, it's the main pathway to give broadband to rural areas in countries that don't have infrastructure or have challenges in terms of geographic, the geography. The market structure has a very important effect of investment and innovation competence. This is manifested through different bodies: the scale economy, margins and financial capacity, efficiency, for example, to manage the resources just like the spectrum. The study we have done uses an estimation model of investments. We took that information from 22 operators in Latin America. And the results we presented from Central America are what was possible, and we took into account the levels of the average levels in Latin America. The first important result of the study, it's in terms of the relation between investment and the intensity of the competition, competence. We found that in Latin America, that relation has like an inverted upside-down U, even increasing the intensity of the competence, of the competitiveness. The capacity of the networks and investment, we will only reach a certain level. We estimate that in the region, the level is at MBTVA around 32 and 38%. This result was very interesting because there are several economic studies that for the last 15 years, from a study from a French economist, that he shows from a theoretical point of view that between the intensity of the competitiveness, competition and the STDA, there's a curve. This is a way of demonstrating and confirming what he has studied in Central America. To measure the quality of the networks, we have used UCLA data, which is an application provider called Speed Test Intelligence, which is used globally, and they have a lot of hits. In the case of Central America, there are around 50,000 clicks every month, and this, of course, strengthens what the results. These are the results. let's talk about the performance on mobile networks. The first thing we found, the speed of operators in market with 4 players, they have an average, they have a 10% average of the regional average. There's a difference of 2 megabytes per minute per second. So the speed of 4G, the 4G speed from operators in the market, they have an increment effect of around 8 megabits per second, meaning a 40%, that is a 40% higher than the regional average. Let's talk about the implications. We believe this is important, the results. We have validated the result with some academics, with the industry, with regulators, and we believe there are important implications in terms of public policy. First, what we have found is that the investment in Central America still have the ups and down U relation, and that's a message. There's no a certain number of operators. The problem is you cannot add new operators because you won't have the results, and you will, the competition will be reduced, and that's not good. The second market in the region with 3 operators, they have greater speeds, and they are 40% higher in terms of lower speed with 4G. That's different to markets with 2G and 3G. We have also made an analysis comparing the household and retail systems. This is very important. Our recommendations are 3. I've had 3. First, about the control of the mergers. We need to review the analysis of the efficiency. We need to analyze the mergers within the network operators, and we need to take into account that the dynamic efficiency manifested through the investments are a very important component. That will be the component will take us to increased productivity of networks and consumers who use the network. The second one, some countries in the region have wholesale and retail regulations. We believe that retail regulations will not always lead to have an optimal result by consumers. We believe it should be lifted because some of the countries in the Russia, they still have it. The region is also behind in terms of the granting of the spectrum, which is already given by the UAT and regional bodies and by several forums. The region should make efforts to catch up the spectrum. The 3 things with these 3 things we can have better results while deploying 4G networks and take them to the entire population in Central America. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Serafino. Pues tenemos un break para café. Los invitamos a pasar y regresamos en un momento.
We can have a coffee break now, and in a few minutes we can continue with the sessions. Thank you.